Hey everybody! So in this video we are going to go over the short story Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway. This was one of the stories that you had to read for homework last week, and it was the one that I warned you would be very confusing and frustrating, and that it would be pretty impressive if you figured out what was happening in the story. Maybe you did. If you did not, we are going to go through it, and we're going to look at all the literary elements and not only see what they reveal about the theme, but what the literary elements reveal about the topic of the story. It's pretty spectacular how it all comes together and how easy it is to remain confused about it until you look at each of these different elements and how they all connect and what they show us. So we will get to the topic here in just a little bit, but instead of telling you right up front, I want to walk you through those literary elements, and then we will try to figure out what that topic is, and then what we learn about the theme. So we'll start with structure. So the story is almost entirely dialogue, right? There are only 7 short descriptive paragraphs, meaning where we get some sort of information about the setting or, what's happening around them. But those little snippets of description, on the surface anyway, have nothing to do with the dialogue. The conversation that the two characters are having, we still don't, on the surface anyway, we don't figure out what they're talking about based on those descriptive paragraphs. It's almost like it's 2 separate parts of the story. We have these 7 very short paragraphs that offer us a little glimpse of description, and then we have the dialogue. It does not appear as though the two mesh. They do, though, and we will get to that in a little bit. There's also very little action in the story, in terms of, what the characters do. Jig, the girl, goes from one side of the station to the other. They have some drinks. The man moves their bags and stops at the bar on his way back. That's it. Literally, the whole story is just the 2 of them sitting there having this conversation. Right? It's frustrating because we never figure out what the conversation is actually about. And it doesn't seem as though it's about anything. By the time you finish reading it, you haven't learned very much, or at least it doesn't seem like you have. There's no big reveal. There's no big climax. There's no resolution. It is literally just a conversation with a little bit of description and very little action. So keep that in mind as we continue looking at the other elements. How does the structure of this story affect how we read it and experience it? Because clearly Hemingway could have written it in an entirely different way. Still keeping the dialogues, there could have been a different structure to the story. It did not have to be almost entirely dialogue. So we have to assume that there's a reason that it was structured in this way. We have to figure out why. But first, let's move on and look at the imagery that we get in the story. And again, it's only 7 short paragraphs of description, So what imagery we do get is sparse, meaning not a lot of it. So we have to pay very close attention to what we do get. We get description about their surroundings, right? The scenery around them. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. So looking out across the valley and seeing the hills, they're long and white. Close against the side of the station, there was the warm shadow of the building and a curtain made of strings of bamboo beads hung across the open door into the bar to keep out flies. So that's a little bit of imagery there. We just get a very simple description of, what it feels like. It was very hot. The hills were white in the sun and the country was brown and dry, going back to those hills across the valley. We hear Jig say they look like white elephants. We also hear her say, yes, everything tastes of licorice, so some gustatory imagery there. And then across on the other side were fields of grain and trees along the banks of the Ebro. Far away beyond the river were mountains. The shadow of a cloud moved across the field of grain, and she saw the river through the trees. That's almost all the imagery we get, just on that one slide. But the imagery is very specific. So we have this very specific imagery about what's on either side of the station, right? The hills on the one side across the valley, we get imagery about those. They look like white elephants. The hills are long and white. The country was brown and dry, right? And then we get the imagery on the other side with the trees and the grain and the river and the mountains and the trees, right? So, just like with the structure, you have to ask yourself, why did Hemingway choose these images to present us with? Well, as I stated, most of the imagery we get, which is not a lot, but most of what we get has to do with the scenery around them. So, in this particular case, most of the imagery is connected to the setting in a very direct way. So, when we get to the setting and atmosphere, we will come back to this imagery. There are some types of imagery that get repeated, some things that we see that are mentioned more than once. And the first is, of course, drinking. We find out pretty quickly that, the American and Jig, they immediately start drinking large beers. And as soon as she mentions that the hills look like white elephants, she asks to order more drinks, even though they're not really finished with the first round. But that mention of white elephants immediately makes her want to keep drinking even more and faster. She remarks at one point, I wanted to try this new drink. That's all we do, isn't it? Look at things and try new drinks. So drinking is a theme within their relationship, right? That seems to be something they do a lot of. By the end of the story, the American is drinking at the bar by himself, and Jig is drinking alone at the table. So something that, they start off doing very casually and like it's just second nature for them to order some drinks while they wait on the train. They start this conversation. At one point she mentions how the hills look like white elephants, because she's kind of often thought when she mentions this. And as soon as she does, she wants to start drinking more and faster. So think about what kind of thoughts would make someone want to immediately start start drinking even more, even faster. We learn that that's something they do a lot of together, right? Almost seems to be the basis of their relationship, is traveling around and looking at things and trying new drinks. And then something that they do together, the basis, the foundation of their relationship, at the end is something that they are doing apart. That's worth paying attention to. Another motif that we get is the white elephant, of course. What is a white elephant? Well, there's a lot of different associations with white elephant. When I hear white elephant, I automatically think of a white elephant gift. This was something that my husband's family used to do. It used to be a tradition that they would have a white elephant gift exchange on Christmas Day. And basically, a white elephant is a gift that it's something that no one wants. So a white elephant gift exchange, like what my husband's family would do is each person would bring an item that they already have around their house. And it doesn't even have to be new. But something that they don't really need or want anymore. And they bring it, they wrap it as a gift. And then I'm sure there are all different kinds of ways to go about the exchange. But at the end of the day, you're trying to you're giving away something that you no longer want. And the gift you get may or may not be something you want, right? Because if it could end up working out well, that the gift you receive, the person who gave it was something they no longer wanted, but it might turn out that you're actually quite pleased with it. But there's always that chance that you also have no use for the gift and don't really want it. So that's what I think of. A white elephant gift is something no one wants. Jig says the hills look like white elephants. So is there a gift that she doesn't want, or a gift that the American doesn't want? And then she later takes it back and says, they don't really look like white elephants. So maybe Jig actually does want the gift. Maybe it's not really something unwanted. The gift is actually quite nice. There's also the idea of the elephant in the room. Something that is painfully obvious that no one wants to talk about, right? We avoid it. We all know it's there. We're all perfectly aware, but we are going to do whatever we can to ignore it and not talk about it. So, is the white elephant actually an elephant in the room? Is it something that they both know is there, but don't want to talk about? White elephants, or albino elephants, they are also quite rare. So, conjuring up this image of a white elephant brings along the associations of something that is unique and rare. Just the color white, because it's not just an elephant, it's a white elephant. The color white is often symbolic of innocence and purity. So, the symbolism of the white elephant. I don't think you have to choose any of these possibilities. I think it is all of these possibilities. It is a gift that she doesn't want at first, but then realizes she does. It is something that is painfully obvious that they are both aware of, but neither of them wants to discuss. It is something that is rare and precious and innocent and pure. The symbolism of the white elephants is one of the keys to understanding the topic of this story. So ponder that for a few minutes everything that was just presented on slide 7 about the white elephants. Just think about it. All right. Now, the point of view in the story. Objective point of view. Again, all we only hear what they say, and we only are told what they do, and we're only told about what they can see. We do not really know anything about how these two characters are thinking or feeling, except for what they themselves might share through the dialogue, right? But we do not get anything about their inner workings, right? The objective narrator uses very simple, compact sentences within very brief paragraphs, right? So if the two are not talking, if it's not dialogue, then it's very dense, compact paragraphs, very simple sentences. This objective point of view forces us to focus on the dialogue, because that's really all we get. We have to pay attention to what they are saying to each other, only to realize at the end that these two people never really say what's truly on their minds and hearts. We get to the end and we still don't know what the heck they're talking about, because neither of them will just come out and say it. So using the objective point of view keeps their thoughts and feelings hidden from us. That is purposeful. But it imitates life, because in real life, we always have to interpret, because we never truly know what someone else is thinking and feeling. Even if they were to tell us, we can never know. We can never know for sure what someone is thinking or feeling. We have to interpret, and we have to make a call on it, and we either have to have faith or not. So, the point of view for this story is the roadblock for us as readers. Because it's an objective point of view, we never get access to what they're thinking and feeling. And because the structure is all dialogue, we're left guessing. We have to interpret what we are given, because nobody really says what they're thinking and feeling, and we don't have access to it. So the point of view is what makes the story frustrating. But again, purposeful choice on Hemingway's part. Now, the setting and the atmosphere. Alright, so the setting. We learn 3 things about the setting. We learn about what things look like on this side. We learn about what things look like on the other side. And we learn what's in the middle, the train station. Right? So, on this side, the hills are long and white. There's no shade, no trees. The land is brown and dry, lifeless and barren, as Jig would be if she has the abortion. That's what the story is about. That's the topic. It's not the theme. It's the topic of their conversation. The topic of their conversation is whether or not she should get an abortion. The hills on that side are the lifeless, barren version of her. On the other side, fields of grain, trees, rivers, mountains, full of life, as Jig is now pregnant, and indicative of the life that she would give birth to. That's the setting. The contrast between the two sides represents her decision, the choice she has to make between no life and life. The train station in the middle There's only two tracks. There's only two ways to go. Only two choices. The train is coming soon, so a decision has to be made. Quick. Which one? What's it going to be? That's the topic of their conversation. It's heartbreaking. Let's look at the atmosphere. We'll come back to that topic here in just a few minutes. Because you think it's of utmost importance, but it's actually secondary to the theme. The atmosphere that's created also adds to this decision that she has to make, right? It's set in an unfamiliar place, both for us and the characters. It's very hot outside, and it's always uncomfortable, when you're outside and it's just too darn hot. So that automatically creates a feeling of discomfort, an atmosphere of it being too hot and uncomfortable. They immediately begin drinking. So knowing that, and knowing why people immediately, start drinking, it's a sign of tension and discomfort. And it's also often used, alcohol is often used as a buffer for difficult conversations. So the fact that they start drinking and she wants to keep drinking so quickly, it adds to that feeling of tension, right? The dialogue is very short and terse. The longest sentence on the first page is only 5 words long. And it is the American snapping at Jig, saying, just because you say I wouldn't doesn't prove anything. It's not 5 words. Anyway, miscounted that. Just because you say I wouldn't doesn't prove anything. And that's in response to her white elephants comment. So, the longest sentence we get on the first page is him snapping at her. So that short, terse dialogue adds to that feeling of tension. And then the longest sentence on the first page adds to that tension even more. The conversation is clearly tense. She even begs him to stop talking at one point. So the atmosphere is very uncomfortable, lots of tension, just like their relationship at this point. You can tell that something is not right between them. Right? And when you look at the setting and you think about the setting and the atmosphere, that's really the key to figuring out what the conversation is about. Because you know that the atmosphere that Hemingway created is one that is very tense and uncomfortable, and a lot of times you kind of feel like you're not even supposed to be listening. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to, like they clearly have some stuff going on. Like, are we really supposed to be reading about this? Seems kind of private, even though we don't know what it is. But that atmosphere is so pronounced. And then you get that juxtaposition of the setting in the train station with only 2 lines. And then you go back to the imagery and the symbolism. The symbolism of the white elephant. Then the pieces start to come together. They are traveling together as they normally do. It seems to be something that's like their pastime. It's what they do. It's their thing. They travel to new places, or at least new to her. If you notice, while they're sitting there at the bar, they're in Spain, right? They're one of the places they can go is Barcelona. She doesn't speak Spanish. The American has to translate between himself and the waitress. So Jig is not from Spain. Don't know if she's from America, but she's definitely not from Spain because she doesn't speak the language. So they travel to these places. They drink a lot. He also mentions, or the narrator also mentions the hotel tags on their luggage as the American's taking the luggage to the other side. So they travel a lot, and they drink a lot. We've learned this. Um, we don't know much about them. We don't know how old they are. We don't know how long they've been together. The fact that it starts off by saying the American and the girl implies that he is older than her. It also implies that we are supposed to view her as a girl, not a woman. And I don't mean that in like a creepy sense. I mean more in like her level of maturity. She's just a little girl. But again, not in a creepy way, because obviously she's an adult. But just more about, like, again, her level of maturity. They start having this conversation. It is tense right away. He keeps talking about an operation that he thinks is perfectly safe. It's just to let the air in. He's known people who have done it and they were all perfectly fine afterwards. She keeps saying she'll do it, but clearly there's something about her responses that makes him question whether or not she really wants to do the operation. And he even says several times, but I don't want you to do it if you don't want to. He even says to her at one point, because she asks him, doesn't it mean anything to you, whatever this operation is? And he says, well, of course it does, but I can't think about that right now. I don't want, I only want you. I don't want anybody else. And she, towards the end is like, I'll do it. It's fine, because, I don't care about me. And he's like, well, I care about you. And she's like, oh, yes, I know, but I don't care about me. And she even says, if I do this, if I have this operation, will things be like they used to be? Can we, still live our life and travel and drink, and I can say things look like white elephants and you'll love it? And he says, I love it now. I just can't think about those things because of this decision I need you to make about this operation. So those little clues, picking up on the dialogue, which by themselves gives us nothing, in conjunction with the setting and atmosphere and the imagery and symbolism, you piece together the fact that she is pregnant. He wants her to have an abortion. She says she's going to, but clearly she's not really sure. And she is being faced with this choice between barrenness, lifelessness, and life. It is the white elephant, right? It is the white elephant in the room, this baby. It is there. They are both perfectly aware of it, but neither of them really wants to talk about it. Is it perhaps also the white elephant gift? Something that at first she doesn't want, a gift that is unwanted, but then maybe, because she takes it back and says, no, they don't really look like white elephants. Is that her way of saying, no, maybe this is something I want? And by the end of the story, you get the idea, you get the feeling anyway, that, I don't know, I guess it depends on what day I read it. Some days I read it and I get to the end and I'm like, oh, she's going to do it anyway. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. I'm saying, like, because I feel so strongly sometimes that she really wants to keep the baby, but I feel like she's going to go through with the abortion because he wants her to so badly, and she wants so badly to stay with him and for things to be like they used to be. And I don't think that's a good way to make that kind of choice. Other days I read it and I'm like, no, she just shut him down at the end. She shut him down and said, I'm fine. As in, like, I can do this. And if you're not going to be along for the ride, peace, right? So I guess it depends on my mood. What's interesting, though, is that by the time we get to the end, we don't know. We don't know, is she going to have the abortion or not? And that leads us into some of the themes. Alright, so our first theme is communication. So we have already learned that the setting and the dialogue immediately create a tense atmosphere, right? Super tense, super uncomfortable. They are clearly debating an issue, the American and Jig. Even when the conversation seems lighthearted, such as when she says the hills look like white elephants, it leads to a tense response and an emotional reaction, which doesn't make sense to us at first. Alright? Now, perhaps it would have been taboo for Hemingway to write about abortion in such an open and frank way, but it's not really about the topic. I don't think Hemingway would have been afraid to say the word if he wanted to. I don't think he would have been afraid to make it crystal clear what the topic of their conversation actually was. He keeps it ambiguous for a reason. Because the whole point is really about communication, right? In addition to never actually saying the word abortion, they never communicate their true thoughts or feelings or desires with each other. They are not open and honest. Their communication is dismal. So it's not just that they're not communicating the word. They're not communicating at all, really. Yeah, they're talking, but are they communicating? No. So the tension and the confusion that we feel while reading it would go away if only they would just talk about what's really going on. Their own tension and discomfort would probably be alleviated if they would just talk about what's really going on. But they don't. They continue to ignore the white elephant in the room, and that is never the answer. And the fact that, we never learn which choice she ultimately makes. We only hear this one discussion, this one conversation. We are left with no choice but to examine how they discuss it. That's why we don't learn one way or the other, because that wasn't the point. Hemingway's point was not what her ultimate decision was going to be. His problem was with how they dealt with it, right? He's like, have it, don't have it, but for God's sake, talk about it. Communication, theme number 1. Alright, theme number 2 is about choices, obviously. But not just about the baby. Obviously, baby versus no baby is our first type of choice. But there's also this choice between emotion and reason. So we'll look at, the fact that we're basically at a two-way train station in the middle of nowhere. The setting on the side of the station is also revealing. A choice has to be made. Which direction to take the train, keep the baby or terminate the baby, choose to live by reason or choose to live by emotions. So we've basically already talked about the fact that they have to literally make a decision on which direction they're going to take the train. So that's the first choice, most obvious choice. And we just got finished discussing the second choice, the one that is more difficult to figure out, which is to keep the baby or not keep the baby. But that third one, reason versus emotions, we haven't talked about that. So let's go into a little more depth. Alright, so the American is the reasonable one, right? He ridicules Jig for her white elephant's remark. He continually refers to the operation with very reasoned, logical remarks. He reasons that their life together, which really means his life, should not be interrupted, that they should be able to continue doing as they please with nothing tying them down. He uses logic to reach that decision. Um, he even remarks at the end that the other people were waiting reasonably for the train, implying that someone else there at the train station was not waiting so reasonably. Jig. Jig is quite emotional and imaginative. She makes the unexpected remark about the hills looking like white elephants. Um, she's the one who's questioning his feelings and motives as they're sort of dancing around the topic. Um, she wants things to go back to the way they were. And when she says, things will go back to the way they were, I can say something like, something looks like white elephants, and you'll love it. And says, I love it now. I just can't think about it. She says, we can have all this. The world will be ours, and no one can ever take it away. And he says, no one can ever take it away. And then she's like, nope, that's not true. It's not ours anymore. Meaning the world, things have changed. And they're probably not going back to the way they were. Even though that's what she desperately wants. And probably why she was, leaning towards having the abortion. Was to stay with him and have things go back to the way they used to be. But as she is sitting there, drinking these beers, looking at the hills, looking at each side of the scenery, and having this really dumb conversation with him, she comes to realize that despite his promises, things will never be like they used to be. She allows the weight of their decision to affect her. She allows the tension of the conversation to affect her. She's emotional, right? When she begs him to stop, it's like she's just so tired of hearing what he has to say. She's the one who ends the conversation saying at the end, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. So the American is a very static, unchanging character. He is the same from start to finish. How we feel about him, that's for you to decide. I have a love-hate relationship with him, but I mostly can't stand him. And then there's, Jig. She's referred to as a girl in the beginning, which makes us think that we're supposed to trust the American's decisions more than hers, right? That he has more knowledge and experience and wisdom and will know the right path to take. Whereas, because he's also the reasonable one, whereas she's very young and immature and inexperienced and emotional and imaginative, and, she's not necessarily going to know what's best. But the fact that she transforms right before our eyes, and you have to really watch closely and listen closely, because she changes right in front of us. She goes from being that scared girl who's just blindly going to follow this man, right? And make this decision so that she can be with him and things won't change. And during this conversation, she evolves. And she grows wiser. And by the end of the story, if you have figured out what they're discussing, what the problem is, she's the one who is on the right track. And not because she's choosing to keep the baby or not. Again, it has nothing to do with which choice she ultimately makes. That's not what makes her wiser. What makes her wiser is that she has realized that everything going on between them is useless. And, he's not helping her. She can, whatever choice she makes, she's better off just being on her own and doing it by herself, because then she knows that she's doing what she wants to do. And things are never going to go back to the way they were anyway. She's never going to get that back. And I suppose at some point, if I were her, I'd start to feel pretty crappy that he keeps trying to manipulate me into making the decision he wants me to make. Right? conversation for another day. So, in review, we have a very, very short story here, made up almost entirely of dialogue. The description we get, the narration we get, is very short, very compact, and it's not a lot. The imagery and symbolism. The imagery brings our attention to the setting and the symbolism. The imagery itself is nothing spectacular. It's just what Hemingway chooses to provide imagery for that's important. And that imagery highlights the setting. That imagery highlights the symbol within the story, the white elephants. The point of view makes us crazy because that's what presents the roadblock to knowing what's really going on, because we don't know what either character is thinking or feeling. All we can do is listen. And sadly, we don't hear a lot because it's just a bunch of hot air for the most part. The person who reveals the most to us is Jig, actually. Most of what comes out of the American's mouth is really not helpful, except to learn a little bit more about him. But that point of view, that objective point of view, man, it keeps that topic underground. And because of that, we don't really know what's going on until we put it all together. So I know it was probably a very frustrating one, but it's one of my favorites because of how masterful it is. All of these elements working together to reveal the topic and the theme. And a lot of people think that the topic is kept hidden from us because it's such a controversial topic, and that's not the reason. The reason the topic is kept from us is to draw our attention to how poorly these two people are communicating, and that maybe we should learn something from them. So, if you have any questions or any other comments that you want to make about this, please reach out to me. I hope this cleared things up for you, and that now maybe you're able to think back on the story and appreciate it in a different way, because I'm sure it just made you angry the first time. But I think it's a really cool story, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and you guys are free to move on to the next thing.